Thank you so much. Thank you so much for bearing with us because these things are not in our hands. Let me tell you that internet connectivity is, still in the evolution stage in our country. As I said in the beginning, human role in asset integrity assurance. Why I chose the topic? The reason was the human role, which has been you can say always positive. I'll say it is always positive role in the asset integrity assurance. But at times, uh, humans act a bit wayward. I use the word monotony, or I some lackadaisical approach, uh, particularly in the government sector. After getting the job, people become a bit complacent, and there are so many, unethical things which also do happen, and people don't realize that their acts are impacting that's hundreds and thousands of people, the whole plant, the environment, uh, mm, that is getting impacted by their acts. So I am asking, welcoming rather you to take a journey with me, because I have seen many such incidents in which very small things, they have taken human lives, and they have impacted the general morale of the people who are working in the industry, and that's it. That's a big drag. My presentation is based on my practical experience, my you can say interaction with people. But let us have a look at the theoretical aspects. That what is asset integrity management is the means of ensuring the people, system, processes, and resources that deliver integrity are in place, in use, and will perform over the whole life cycle. So when assets are created, they are supposed to background at the back of our mind. The asset integrity has three constituents: the design integrity, operational integrity, and technical integrity. What is design integrity? Design integrity is the basic conception of the asset, how the asset is going to be, what will be the capacity of the asset, what will be the metallurgy, what will be the protection, the HAZOP, HAZAN, HAZED, LUPA study, HERA, then cathodic protection, corrosion protection. All those things are perceived and you can say designed well, so that the asset performs its given role over its life cycle. So I would say that a good design gives you 60 to 70% guarantee that asset is going to act as per the plan, as per the conception, basic conception. And as construction is also one aspect which I take it in the design only because it is the you can say it is the practical implementation of the conception which has been designed, which has been thought. So construction integrity, construction strictness, construction quality, that makes a lot of impact on the asset integrity over its life cycle. Once the construction is over, once those tests, hydro tests, those welding, RT, UT, MPT, those radiography tests, the laying of pipeline as per the cover that is prescribed by the regulations, that is done, we can be sure that asset is going to perform. Otherwise, if the construction is not good or it is done in a haste or under some pressures, then it is a fait accompli, because the pipes are buried in the ground, the unit starts commissioning, and everything is, the design aspect is forgotten. It is the operational part that comes into picture. People are to operate that asset, however it has been built up. So keep it running. Keep it running is the operational integrity, and lot many things like DCS, auto shutdown, ESP, protection, safety walls. Those things are required to be operational and used when things like runaway reactions take place in FCCU unit like this. I mean, there are runaway reactions. So how to protect the whole system under operation? And at the same time, the operational integrity has to ensure that the capacity that is support that comes with the asset has to be obtained. The third is the technical integrity, that is operational maintenance. It is the way to keep the components, various components of that asset into the system. And there are various ways to maintain the integrity of those components, the predictive maintenance, preventive maintenance, OEM guidelines, those robotics, maintenance and inspection criteria for sour and sweet crudes, other products. Those things come into picture. Now, these are the basically theoretical aspects. The whole thing is conceived, operated, and maintained by humans, and it is done well. I would say that it is done well unless something else starts happening. Let me introduce you to the regulation part in our country, how things are at the moment. This is a typical IMS, integrity management system regulation of the country for the city gas distribution system. So you can see various schedules from 1 to 8, 1 to 9. It is it talks of hardware aspects. In Schedule 10, the care has been given to adequacy of manpower positioned at various stages of the project. So minimum qualification, experience, those things are prescribed, and with that backup of competence, the people are placed in those workstations, and they are supposed to perform the their duties. Now we are entering into the brass tack. Despite having everything in place, every good hardware, state-of-the-art hardware, protections, everything in this thing. Why incidents happen? And these 4 studies, they are talking of human intervention of disaster in the disasters. Henrik's study talks 88%, DuPont 96%, behavioral science technology 80 to 90%, 76% by quality safety. Ultimately, the brass tack of the whole issue is the man behind the machine. Machine will given all the wherewithal to operate. But how the machines are getting operated, are they being used or abused? That is the thing which I am going to talk today, basically. This is the slide which I chose from my OSD days. It's a very self-explanatory slide. It talks of human errors by 71%, then equipment failure design efficiency, static electricity, lightning, sabotage, pilferage, human error, others. So mostly it is, I mean, the emphasis is on the human that operates the machine or that has to take care of the asset integrity assurance. This is a general slide. It talks of various barriers which are created at the design stage itself. That in case something happens, it has to be contained. The detection has to take place. If it goes further, I mean, these are the barriers, and gradually crossing the barrier, there are more barriers, then further barriers, until it reaches to the level of a disaster, maximum accidental disaster. So, start from the potential, goes to the actual event. There are various barriers, or there are various doors which have to be broken by that particular incident. So I am going to talk about those incidents where all these barriers were broken, and there was chaos, and there was fire, fatality, explosion, etc., etc. There is a term called safety critical elements. If you see the definition of safety critical element, it is the part of the facility, plant, including computer programs, whose purpose is to prevent, control, or mitigate major accident hazards, and the failure of which could contribute substantially to a major accident. Now, this is okay. I mean, I don't have to say anything about it because it is all a part of the design, and maybe in the operation, technical, all these things are taken care of so that major accident hazards don't occur. But at the same time, are humans not considered safety critical? They should also be considered safety critical elements. Now, the time has come to know the human psychology, the human brain that comes to the factory or the plant with some mindset, some egos, some issues, some kind of thing which we are going to really talk in detail today. What is that causes the human errors, human failures in operating the best human machinery, and why there is why there is this lackadaisical approach, or overconfidence, or casualness to the this thing, standard operating practice. What is that which mars the human logic or sensitivity towards working in a plant? Coming to the brass tacks straight away now. There is a POL plant, that is a plant where the product transfer is to take place. How the product transfer has to take place? There is a MOV A, there is a hammer blind B, and HOV C. In ideal condition, there are two parts of let's say hammer blind. One is the I section, which is open section, and other is the blind section. For positive blinding, for positive stoppage, that blind section is used. When you have to start the product transfer from one tank to other marketing company, you have to operate the hammer blind first. I mean that MOV part is MOV is closed. At C, HOV is closed. Only hammer blind is blinded. You take out the blind part and insert the I section. That is, now the pipe, that part is open. That hammer blind part is open. Now with that open hammer blind, you have to start operating valve C, HOV, and see if there is any leakage, because when the MOV is closed, there may be instance that there might be some leakage. So that leakage has to be checked. Once it is ensured that there is no leakage, we start gradually opening the MOV, either from locally or from remote. This MOV is supposed to be opened either from local push button station or from remote from the control. This is a typical case of a fire where a wrong operation took place. What was that wrong operation? The valve MOV was open. Why it was open? What made the operation people to keep it open when the blind was there? I mean, I can't answer those questions. But that valve was open. Hammer blind was, the I section was tried to be inserted to start the product transfer from MS tank to the OMC. Now, when you change over from blind to I section, a time comes when the valve is, I mean, that the inside of the flange is open to the atmosphere. Now, what will happen? Everybody can understand what will happen at that time. With valve C closed, the whole head of the MS tank will be against that particular crack, which which is found in the hammer tank. So the vapor cloud, the leak starts happening, vapor cloud formation is there, and the operator, they run away from that situation because the leak is so heavy and vapor formation, vapor cloud is so heavy that there was chances of people getting unconscious. This situation went on for quite some time. People tried to do something, some close the MOV or do something with the hammer blind, but whoever was going was getting unconscious and had to be removed from that situation. And somehow this whole leakage went on for about 40 to 45 minutes. And with that 40 to 45 minutes, the whole area got engulfed with the vapor cloud. And after the end of 45 minutes, it caught some source of ignition, because source of ignition is very common. You switch on the fan and it is the source of ignition. Somewhere somebody started some electrical device, it got the source of ignition, and there was huge fire in the whole plant. What happened? Loss of primary containment of motor spirit means there was a leakage from the tank itself, with the vapor cloud going out of the that area, that secondary containment. These are the barriers which I am talking about. These were the barriers created. Like I showed the slide, the barriers are placed. So barriers start breaking. How the barriers were breaking? These are the explanation. Then incapacitated operating personnel, inadequate mitigation measure. There was no water. There was no water or anything which could water or PPEs or tools and tackles. People were going with the tools and tackles to do something, but there was a probability of some spark and explosion. So the situation was, left as it is. Then approach of operating personnel became difficult due to rapid increase of vapor cloud, improper tools and tackles, fear of fire. The scenario got unabated, and 45 minutes after 45 minutes, there was a fire engulfing the whole depot. Now this is the scenario of the plant. All floating roof tanks of the depot they caught fire. There is a peculiar situation in a fuel depot that when the fire takes place, all the tanks get fired simultaneously, all the floating roof tanks, because that seal area is a containment area. The vapor cloud tries to settle on that area. And the moment there is a spark, ignition, some ignition, some spark, some fire, all the tanks, they catch fire. So fire spread to all tanks and raged for 11 days. Management had considered decision to allow the petroleum product to burn because whoever was going was unable to do anything practically because of the heat intensity. So product consumed was 60,000 KL. Total installation destroyed. 16 lives lost, 11 lives lost, and several other injured. Collateral damage. Car dealer, there was a car dealer whose whole showroom was damaged. The pump house for trunk crude pipeline also damaged. There was a pump house also for the pipeline that was damaged, and this handicap reduced the throughput of two major oil refineries. It took 18 months to rebuild the facilities on a war scale. The total loss was around $65 million. In the beginning, there was a video shown on Piper Alpha. Piper Alpha incident in which 167 casualties had taken place. What I am going to show is why it happened. What was the human intervention of the Piper Alpha incident? We only see the fire. But why the fire occurs as such? What is the cause, basic cause? So I'm going to get you into a small video which starts what happened exactly in Piper Alpha incident.
So you can share the screen once again. Because your video will be in the folder, I believe. So you can press escape. And you can go to the video.
Yeah.
Immediately after the explosion of the Piper Alpha, it became imperative that the cause of the accident be uncovered quickly. Britain's oil production was dangerously reduced, and the chance of another rig suffering a similar disaster meant speed was of the essence. Working backwards, investigators began to trace the blast back to its point of origin. That's when failure analysis was called in.
We were called immediately after the disaster on Piper Alpha occurred, in part because of our extensive past experience in investigating accidents in the North Sea, in part because of our technology. But immediately, the investigation took on a character of its own. And I wouldn't characterize any investigation of any part of the accident on Piper Alpha as easy, because let's face it, the next day, 30,000 tons of evidence were under 500 foot of water.
Investigators had determined that the first explosion took place in what was known as Module C. The control room was located here, immediately above the explosion. It was destroyed instantly. Most of the crew were in their quarters located here. Tragically, the flames were between them and the lifeboats. Though the area of the explosion had been isolated, the cause of the blast was still unknown. In order to zero in on the ignition point, eyewitness testimony had to be compared with the actual layout of the Piper Alpha. Rebuilding the rig would be impossible. But by using the original blueprints, failure analysis was able to reconstruct the Piper Alpha inside the computer.
What engineering animation permits is as close to time travel as mortals will ever get. We can travel back in time and stand on the platform as it existed the day before its destruction, even though it will never exist again. We can turn our heads, we can walk up stairways just as if the platform existed today, and everywhere we look, we see what we would have seen on that platform that day.
After months of painstaking reconstruction, using the computer animation and eyewitness accounts of the blast as a reference, investigators tracked the beginning of the problem to one of two pressure safety valves in Module C. These valves help to vent gas as a part of what is known as the process stream. The day of the explosion, it was being cleaned by a freelance contractor. While this valve was being worked on, the second of the two pumps was handling the gas stream. At 6 p.m., the contractor stopped working. Assuming he'd finished the job in the morning, he hand-tightened the valve cap. The contractor then went up to tell the control room the progress of the job.
It's the number 3 valve again. It's giving us a wee bit of trouble.
As far as investigators have reconstructed, the change of shift from the day crew to the night crew was going on at the same time the contractor reported the valve's removal.
Unfortunately, that fateful night, a safety relief valve was removed from one process leg during one shift, and the following labor shift, the workers didn't know the valve had been removed.
At approximately 10 p.m., the decision was made to turn on the dismantled pump.
There's no question that on the night of the accident on Piper Alpha, there was a process failure and there was a large-scale release of some flammable gas mixture. Once the gas was released into the air, it had oxygen, and it was only a matter of time until it found an ignition source.
3 minutes later, that source was found. On a platform the size of the Piper Alpha, there were many possible fuses for an explosion. The manufacturer of one of the rig's giant turbines needed to know if their engine had been responsible. Located just 20 feet from the gas leak, this turbine was an aircraft jet engine, specially designed to power one of the Piper Alpha's huge gas compressors. Failure analysis's engineers believed that no matter how hot the turbine got, it still could not have caused the blaze. In a small shed at their test facility in Phoenix, Arizona, they set out to prove it. In 3 different tests, the flammable propane was sprayed into the shed containing a replica of the turbine. The heat was intense and the temperature kept rising. The engineers waited for the explosion. It never came. The turbine pipe, no matter how hot, did not ignite the gas. Once the investigators were satisfied that they had enough data to clear the turbine, they needed to prove that under different circumstances, the gas could ignite.
There is one sure and certain way to demonstrate that. Turn on an ignition source.
The results of failure analysis's tests were entered into the record of the official British government inquiry. That inquiry determined where the fire began, but could not say what ignited it.
Working on an oil production platform, producing flammable oil and gas in the middle of the ocean is never going to be as safe as working in an office. But can situations like that which happened on Piper Alpha be avoided? Absolutely.
Today in Aberdeen, Scotland, home to many of the victims and the few survivors of the Piper Alpha disaster, this monument stands. It commemorates the bravery of the men who fought for their lives on that fiery July night. The exhaustive inquiry into the Piper Alpha disaster had a tremendous impact on safety regulations. Crew accommodations have been moved far away from the production zones, with blast-proof walls between them. Fireproof chutes go from the living quarters down to the safety of the ocean's surface, and lifeboats are now stored where the crews can get to them in any emergency.
That is one informative video, sir. Pretty much, I'm pretty sure the participants would have got an idea what exactly happened with the Piper Alpha. You can continue sharing your presentation, sir, and we have reached approximately, we are at 12 o'clock right now. So you may please keep the timing also in mind when you go ahead with the remaining of the presentation. Over to you, sir.
So, yeah, we saw what happened in case of Piper Alpha. That was, I mean, human put the jacket on that particular report, and the communication between the two ships did not take place like it should have been done. So, the human to human contact in the plant is a must. It should not so happen that a chef person who has done something important, that communication does not go to the next chef. This is the lesson which we learned from this particular instance. The second, the depot video which I showed, we also have some certain lessons from that particular instance, and those lessons have been, you can say, manifested in a new regulation known as OSD 244, which is made on the basis of one particular report, MP Lal committee report, which gave so many suggestions, so many ideas, but the feasibility of those ideas, of those suggestions were discussed across the whole oil and gas, and a new standard, OSD, Oil Industry Safety Director Standard 244, was created after that particular fire, which is there in the open market now, available. I will now talk about certain incidents, more incidents where human interface was clear. There was a refinery, there is a refinery in South India where the LPG drain wall was opened to let the water go out, because LPG is heavier than water. So water is down under the LPG always. So that water is drained, and a care has to be taken. The valve has to be closed when the LPG starts appear. But in this case, that valve remained open and LPG came out. There was a vapor cloud, there was a huge explosion, and almost entire refinery had to be built up again. Then, in one refinery where the commissioning was going on, basically, the high pressure hydrogen compressor. Now, hydrogen under high pressure is invisible. You cannot see the gas. You can pass through that area where the leakage is there, and you will not know. You can't make out that there's a leakage as such. So that leakage, it took the life of 3 persons, because the gasket in the hydrogen compressor, that was of wrong material, selection was bad, and later on advisory was issued by OSD to use the right kind of gasket, have a proper protocol of high pressure system as such. In south of India, one particular gas pipe, which was getting the gas from the supplier, that got corroded one day. That gave way one day, and there was a huge explosion. I mean, that instance has been shown in the beginning, the video. I happened to be there after 3 years of that particular instance, and I saw that there were 19 kilometers of section that was going to be replaced. Now, why that 19 kilometers was being replaced? Because at one particular point, the pipe rises and goes to the level of Godavari railway bridge. So that gradient to the point from where the gas is received was full of condensate. The gas supplier was not drying the gas. It was the gas was coming with the condensate. The whole section was filled with the condensate. It started eating away the pipe, and time came. Even intelligent pigging had given those warnings, but they were not heeded. And ultimately, at one fine day, there was the pipe ruptured, and there was a huge fire causing fatalities and collateral damage. We are well aware of a oil well fire in the eastern part of the country, and it was after the workover was completed. The capping was to be done by a by a contractor with a third party inspector. The capping is to be done with proper protocol, some standard operating practice that was not adhered to. The gas was leaking. It could be stopped, and a time came when it got a source of ignition. There was a fire, and it raged on months. So the third party inspectors, the role of third party inspectors, the competence, the criteria that also has to be watched by the client properly, so that those people who do not have the knowledge of the subject, they are not put in place. One fire occurred in this fluidized catalytic cracker unit in one of the Indian refineries. It was under shutdown, and startup had to take place. There was so much pressure on the people to start it as early as possible. It was night shift, and in the SOP, there is a clear-cut guideline given to drain a condensate pot, because unless that condensate pot is drained, there is a presence of water, and this water, when it gets mixed with the boiling hydrocarbon, there is a boil out, there is a flash, and there can be explosion. World over, there have been some instances, but the operators, in a hurry to start up the unit in the night under that pressure, they did not drain the condensate pot, and there was a fire. The whole plant was gone. Basically, the whole plant had to be rebuilt. Number of fatalities occurred, and some people, they have some people died very difficult death. These are some construction incidents, typical construction incidents, which I happened to investigate. Can you believe that earth wire can kill the people? It cannot. It is supposed to protect the people. It is not supposed to kill the people. But this thing happened in one of the construction sites of Eastern Refinery, where a damaged electrical supply cable had been used, and those non-standard fuses were there. There was a phase to earth fault in the cable. It remained sustained. It passed on to the earth, and it also passed on to the that day there was a pit. Previous day there was a rain, so the pit a pit was being cleared by the casual workers. One of the strands of the earth wire was passing through that pit, and these two people got shock, and they died a death before. They died a very difficult death in front of so many people who were merely watching, could not do anything. So ultimately, the main supply was switched off, and that's how the cable was made de-energized. Another incident: two construction workers in one of the South Indian refinery. They were working in the 11 kV bus bar, which was in the cable cellar, and I mean they were welding the this GI sheet on which the cables are pressed. So the work permit was there to work at that site in close proximity to the live 11 kV section. No thought had been given that proper sectionalizing should be done and the load should be transferred to the other generators. The section was live, and that metallic fume that came from the welding, it made a path, tracking path to the live bus bar. There was a electrocution of one worker. The other worker tried to extricate him, to do help to him. He also died in that process. In third, this instance, number 8, one particular engineer who was working in the refinery for more than 25 years. He was a testing engineer. He was the lifeline of electrical testing. He died touching an 11 kV bus bar with this confidence that it was not live. This was, there was something, some, you can say, a wrong concept in his mind that it was not live. He touched that particular 11 kV bus bar while he was seeing the specification of a current, this core balance current transformer, because the DG was this the gas turbine was tripping quite often. So he wanted, what is the specification of that core balance current transformer? So in that process, he opened that live panel and he was seeing at the CBCT. One maintenance engineer, he tried to warn him, caution him that this is live. He said it is not live. The other tried to push the hand of that engineer on that particular bus bar, but that engineer, he took away his hand. He got the shock, but this man, the testing engineer, he got in full touch with the bus bar and he died. These are some of the pictures. You see this. This is the earthing pit. This is the earthing pit, temporary earthing pit created in the construction site. Low dia pipe, everything non-standard. This is the drain pit where those two people were working. So this entire poor earthing, then thing, poor earth pit pipe. This is the pit pipe, and this is the GI strip. How the contact is done, you can see. And this is the cable which took the life. This was a damaged cable, already damaged cable. You can see the damage, this damage. Cable armor was cut before the termination, which is supposed to be in contact with the metallic frame of the panel. It was cut before the termination itself. This is the system, supply system, electrical supply system used by the contractor. One particular instance of a person working at a height of 100 feet above the ground on a that he was doing the grinding work. He got a shock and he died in that process. The earthing was poor totally, and nobody knew what to do, how to bring him down to the ground. There was no way that he could be resuscitated or given some treatment. He remained there for half an hour. By the time he was brought down by a lift, snorkel lift, he was already dead. In my life, I have come across 2 instances. I joined Indian Oil as a graduate engineer trainee with the confidence that I knew I was the best. I knew everything, and I was full of overconfidence. I was put in the power plant shift operation. In one particular night shift, we were supposed to start a boiler, and I was given the task of taking the insulation value of one particular feed pump, which was 6.6 kV feed pump. So I just told the boiler operator that kindly do not switch on the pump when, because we are going for checking the insulation value with my operator, control room operator with a Megger. So I don't know how this communication to that gentleman was received. So I thought that he had understood, and I thought. Let me underline this. I'll tell you that we opened that live panel. No, it was not live. It was breaker was off. So without racking out the breaker, without taking out the control fuse, I took the wires in my hand and put on the phases and started. The control room operator started measuring. You will not believe, by the time we just stopped the measuring, the breaker switched off. The breaker switched off. What would have happened if we were measuring and the breaker would have switched on? We would have been charged. Both of us would have died on that. So communication is one aspect which is very important. I have learned one thing. If you are communicating to somebody, ask him what he has understood. Immediately you try to know whether your communication has gone to him properly or not. Second instance, I was the in charge of electrical maintenance of AU1, atmospheric unit 1 of that refinery, and this plant was under shutdown. It was coming to startup. A fire had taken place prior to the startup with oil water sewage fire. So many cables had they had got burned. They had been replaced. We were again trying to start it. So one transformer was switched on, and the other transformer was about to be taken on the bus bar. So without phasing, I told the operator to switch on the breaker, LT breaker, because I was sure that we had not done anything in the terminal box of the transformer. We had not done any maintenance. We have not done anything. So I was sure that R to R phase, Y to Y phase, and P to P phase, they are that phasing is there. But my boss was there, standing there. I'm trying to highlight this instance to tell my younger friends that never ever bypass the standard operating practices. Never ever. However they are bothersome, pinching, or make you frustrating, but do not bypass the standard operating practice. He asked me that, Mr. Sharma, you take the phasing proper. So I was not happy, but then boss was boss. So what I did, I did the phasing. R to R phase 400 volts, B to B phase 400 volts, and Y to Y phase 400 volts. My my whole that thing. I just thought that I have stopped breathing, and it so happened that one of our operators, he had done something in the terminal box, and he had he had changed the phasing because one of the termination was very tight. So he unlocked the nuts and bolts and made it proper. But that was not conveyed to me. So this was again a case of miscommunication or no communication to the person who was going to do switching on. So learning better communication, follow all steps for de-energization of equipment to be worked on. I should have taken out dragged out the breaker. I should have taken out the control fuses. Then only I should have opened the rear panel and done the measuring, but I didn't do it. Established checks and practices are to be adhered at all times because a lot of learning has gone into making those established checks and practices. The third-party inspection in our country now it has come in the form of some, third-party inspection. The regulator PNGRB, Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board, along with the NABCB, National Accreditation Board for Certification Bodies. They are empaneling, they are accrediting the third parties for certain regulations which have been formed by PNGRB. And I'm going to take 5 minutes on this particular aspect on the competence and processes being followed by our third parties in our country. The process is like this. The NABCB, National Accreditation Board for Certification Body, it this ISO is basically inspection of inspecting body. So the entity has to be A-type status, has to have A-type status for getting an empanelment with PNGRB. What is the A-type status? It has to be purely inspecting body. It cannot be doing any other activity. B-type is there can be a inspection setup in the hierarchy, but it will render inspection only to its own organization. And C-type is free to render inspection to its own organization as well as outside. But then C-type body will not be called a third-party inspector. PNGRB panels only A-type third-party inspection bodies. It has nothing to do with B or C-type. These inspection bodies are doing design verification, vendor inside acceptance, these kind of things, our third parties are engaged at the moment in the oil and gas sector. These are the regulations which have been formed. You will see that T4S has been put before all the regulation. Now T4S is in the regulation there are 4 S's: standard, specification, safety, and one more S. So each regulation is called T4S. Like there is T4S for NG pipeline, T4S for city gas distribution, T4S for etc. etc. So these regulations, except for the last one for retail outlets, in these regulations, the third-party inspection is there. Now, third-party inspection has 2 facets. One is during the construction, and other is when the construction is over, auditing. Auditing is also done by third party. In the construction, these are the schedules of a typical T4S regulation, and all these schedules are critical from third-party inspection perspective. Competence and process issues of third-party inspection. Everybody will appreciate that the competencies of auditor has to be one notch above the competencies of field personnel. Otherwise, this will not be a third-party inspection. Majority of third parties are private bodies, and there are problems. The auditing skills are not, they don't commensurate with knowledge of regulations. Undue pressures of client also takes place. In one particular instance, I saw that the hydro test timing was cut short to start the commissioning process immediately. And the job criteria is L1, and lowest bidder gets the job, and at times there are problems with the quality of the lowest bidder. And one more issue of concern is that for the construction there is no PNGRB empanelment, though NABCB does the accreditation, but PNGRB has not accepted only construction third-party inspection so far. So any third-party inspection which has got this thing, which has got ISO 17020, or may not get, or might not have got the ISO 17020, they are engaged in construction in oil and gas sector. And construction, as I said in the beginning, a poor construction is a fait accompli for the people who are working, operating, and maintaining the system. Transient manpower with IBs. The manpower which is there today, inspection body is not there. They join somewhere else. The whole expertise gets lost. But still, the IBs are retaining those. They are not informing the accreditation bodies. So they are continuing with their accreditation and they are doing the work. So this is a area which is a real, and it's a area which needs concern. Now, sectoral competence for the, I'll talk of ERDMP, Emergency Response and Disaster Management Plan, where the auditor must have sectoral competence. There are about 10 downstream areas which are there in the PNGRB regulations, starting from the refinery, right, up to the retail outlets, LNG, LPG pipeline, NG pipeline, city gas distribution system. All these downstream sectors, they are to undergo emergency response and disaster management plan verification by a third party as per the regulation ERDMP 2010. Now, a third party which approaches NABCB for ERDMP accreditation must have expertise in that particular sector in which they want to do the inspection. It cannot so happen that a third party which is good in pipelines is also good in refineries, or if party which is good in retail outlets is good for cross-country pipelines. So a sectoral categorization has to be done, and we are in the process. We in NABCB, we are in the process of creating that sectoral competence, and in future the accreditation will be given as per that competence only.
So we only have 5 more minutes left for the technical talk. I would request, we also have some questions coming in.
Yeah,
So
I'm at the fag end.
all right, sir. Thank you.
These are the elements of the competence which we have created in the NABCB: qualification, relevant industrial experience, ASNT, that entity level, site inspection, that inspection, acceptance, cathodic protection, operation and maintenance of pipeline, process plant, awareness of regulation, TPIA procedures, MS Office, proficiency, communication skills, like that. I mean, we have defined and we have created a procedure wherein the TPIs are able to evaluate their inspectors and accordingly authorize. So attempts are being made to raise the level of third-party inspection in the country. It is not that everything is bleak and it is not good, but we are picking up, and in future things will be looking much brighter. But for the time being, I mean, we have to carry on with raising the level of competence of our people seriously and with a lot of intent. Competence criteria of, I repeat this, that there is no competence criteria of third party during construction. At the moment, there is no such criteria made. A criteria is made for the auditing, that is in process, or when the plant starts working. At that time, the audits, for the audits, the criteria are there, and PNGRB also empanels only those bodies for audits, not for construction. Then surprise inspections by regulator and ISO interacting body for evaluation. We had discussed it many times that we must carry the surprise inspection, because on the day of assessment, ISO assessment, the IB, the inspecting body, puts it best forward, the best foot forward. The accreditation body is impressed, and I mean, at times they get the ISO accreditation 2000, this ISO 17020 accreditation, but later on complaints starts coming to the accreditation body, even to the regulator, for poor work being done by these people. So at the fag end, I can say that any failure is an opportunity to begin again more intelligently. We should not commit the same error twice. That is not acceptable. To err is human. It is an adage, but then it cannot. The error cannot be twice or thrice. That is not like a human being, because humans are intelligent. They are able to understand. They are able to learn from the failure. And man can fail many times, but it's not a failure until he begins to blame. So there is no blame. We are basically what we practice in life, and we are responsible for what we are. That's all. I thank you for the participation, and I'll take the questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your experiences and for sharing so many different case studies. I'm pretty sure the participants did find them fascinating. You might have seen the Q&A panel. We have a question from Mr. Satish Iyengar. Sharma sir, are you able to see the Q&A panel?
I'm not able to see it. Yeah.
All right. I believe...
I'll see it.
Okay. You can stop sharing your screen, sir. That will be better. Or if
okay.
you're unable to, maybe I can help Mr. Iyengar.
No, I'm see. As presented in threat and barrier, the most common thing for an incident are mechanical, electrical, and instrumentation equipment. Item integrity. Answer. Also, healthiness of detection system through life cycle challenge industry after incident. Immediate response for electrical isolation is key business. See, Satish, I happen to know Satish. Satish is is a very he's a live wire himself. He's working with an IB. Let me tell you that the barriers break because of our lackadaisical approach to the concept of lockdowns. I mean, he's telling of mechanical, electrical, and instrumentation equipment. Integrity is something, they have to come with the proper specification and proper SIL ratings. If we are proposing at the design stage, and also the electrical cables, if they are FRLS, fire retardant low smoke type, they have to be fire retardant low smoke type. They cannot be other cables. We may have to pay more, but then we are choosing those FRLS cables deliberately, because we don't want the electrical cables to burn during the fires. They should have heat withstandability ability for half an hour or more than that. But as far as this de-energization and energization is concerned, that is, we have proto system in place. We have learned a lot from the work permit system failures, in which more than 2 or 3 agencies are working on the same equipment, and there are incidences where one person has one agency has finished the task and other agency is working, and the equipment is started. This happened in one refinery, and 2 persons died. So detection systems throughout life challenge industry facing after response for electrical solution is key. I hope I have answered his query, but in case he wants to, because he has 3-4 questions, he wants
So
to get
Mr.
in.
Iyengar, Mr. Iyengar can unmute himself and ask the question as well. So if Mr. Iyengar would like to speak, you can speak. I've given you the rights. Yes, Mr. Iyengar.
Satish, kindly ask. Mr. Satish, kindly ask the question. I'll answer it.
He unmuted himself, but I believe Mr. Iyengar is unable to use the audio, I believe. You can try once again. Are you able to speak there? Always these technical glitches, they tend to happen. If not, we can continue with the Q&A itself, or maybe Mr. Sharma can ask what is the clarification that you're looking for.
Anybody who is there among the participants wants to ask any question? He's having some network issues. Iyengar has some network.
Yes. So it's all right.
But ask him to get in touch with me on email. I'll answer all this.
Sure, not a problem. I believe we have another question from Mr. Mishra, Rakesh Kumar Mishra. He says, sir, as you mentioned, I believe that stage-wise auditing by statutory body should be mandatory. Oil and gas industry should think about it. I think that is an opinion by Mr. Mishra.
I will. We have been talking about it. We have been discussing, and this will. I am sure this will come soon, very soon, because the quality of construction is very, very important, and people have to be empaneled for construction in oil and gas sector. So this will come. I am very sure, and we'll also create a competence criteria for people working in third-party inspection in the construction sector. Any question? Any other question?
Well, I believe our NIES trustee has given us a couple of comments. Before I read out the comments, if you will permit me, sir, I will request our NIES International Gateway India Section's Secretary, Mr. Sumit Kataria, to kindly extend a vote of thanks. We are at the end. Mr. Kataria, if you can hear me, you can kindly put your video on and you can unmute yourself and extend the vote of thanks. Thank you, sir.
Am I audible? And good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon, Sharma sir. It was an honor and privilege to hear you out, and it was an amazing presentation. It's my proud privilege to present the vote of thanks. I'm actually filling in the vote of thanks on behalf of Nivedita ma'am, and she's got a little preoccupied on a personal front. I'd start by saying a little apology note on the little technical network issue that we had, but technical glitches are always a part of webinars, and that's the new normal. I'd start by thanking the North Zone team who's put a lot of energy and got this session organized. So thank you so much. And a big thank you to Sharma sir. Sharma sir actually needs no introduction. His depth of knowledge and his width of experience talks it all, sir. And it was an enlightening presentation for all of us. I'm sure I enjoyed every bit of it, sir. A big thank you to Sharma sir for having, removed time and actually put in the presentation together. A brief about you, sir. 35 years into the industry, sir. You've electrical graduate from Delhi University. 35 plus years of work experience with IOCL in various divisions, right from captive power plants to electrical workshops to engineering services to even HR. So you would realize the kind of content and the kind of knowledge. He's also been on the OISD as director engineering. He's also served with Kane, wherein he was advisor on projects, carried out fire investigations, safety audits, where he was named internal divisional audit team member. He's also a faculty member of IMIST, which is International Minimum Industrial Safety Training. He's done more than 20 programs there and trained more than 500 engineers. So it is really fortunate to hear right from you. And the best part is that he came forward to share his experiences, the wide knowledge that he gets, and he knows it all. He's been through the construction part. He's been through the execution. He's also auditing on behalf of regulators. He knows the standards. So it was an honor having you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts to take this session. Really appreciate the time. A big thank you to Amarjeet for coordinating and anchoring the show. Thank you, Amarjeet. And most important, thank you for all the participants. It is because of you all that these sessions happen. Thank you. We expect a lot of inputs from you. Do feel free to write to Amarjeet if you want any tweaking in sessions. Thank you so much and have a great day ahead. Have a superb weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy. That's all from my end. Thank you so much, Amarjeet.
Thank you so much, sir, for extending the vote of thanks. Thank you so much, Sharma sir, once again for your valuable time. I believe a couple of people also had a couple of questions. I will be posting Sharma sir's email ID, and if you do not get it, you can always send the questions to me. I also want to mention a special thanks from Manohar sir, who is the NIGIS trustee. He says that the presentation was really interesting and an eye-opener. The companies nowadays are reducing the manpower, thereby cutting cost of maintenance. And the younger generation is not aware of the system. And the thoughts about this have been really, really enlightening. So thank you so much once again, Rao sir. Thank you, Sharma sir. And we look forward to having another technical talk for the participants. All I have to say is that I'm going to meet you next time with another interesting technical talk. And if you do have any suggestions, you can always put it on LinkedIn, on my profile or the Northeast India North Zone section. And you also have the YouTube channel. Plus, you can always post details to me on my number or on my email ID. So thank you once again for joining in. Have a great weekend and stay safe. And if possible, stay at home. Sharma sir, do you have any ending remarks? You can always say that, or otherwise I shall close the webinar.
I thank NIS North Zone for giving me this opportunity to be to present this typical subject, because nobody talks of humans. Nobody talks of humans in the asset integrity. But I chose this subject deliberately to highlight the role of humans in maintaining the asset integrity.
So great, sir. Thank you very much. Once again, I shall be closing the session now. And you have a great weekend then. Thank you.
Thank you.